Story 1. The Whispering Shadows. It was supposed to be an easy gig, just a weekend of pet sitting for a neighbor who was taking a quick trip out of town. Sarah, a 24-year-old freelance writer, didn't expect anything strange to happen. She had done this countless times before. The routine was simple. Feed the cat, give it fresh water, clean the litter box, and maybe enjoy a few quiet hours reading or watching TV in the cozy apartment. But nothing could have prepared Sarah for the terrifying events that would unfold that weekend. The first sign that something was wrong came on the first night. Sarah had arrived at the apartment, checked in on the cat, and settled down in the living room with a cup of tea. The apartment was silent, the kind of silence that makes you feel like you're being watched. She dismissed it as a typical feeling of being in someone else's home. After all, she was used to house-sitting, and most pets were easy to take care of, but as the evening wore on, she began to notice odd things. The cat, a sleek black feline named Midnight, kept staring at the hallway that led to the bedroom. Its eyes weren't just fixed. They were following something, or someone, that wasn't there. Sarah shrugged it off, but a cold shiver crept up her spine. Midnight meowed and scratched at the door, as if begging Sarah to open it. But Sarah hesitated. She didn't want to disturb the pet's usual routine, and besides, she was starting to feel uncomfortable with how still everything was. She settled in for the night, but sleep didn't come easily. Around a.m., Sarah was jolted awake by a soft, almost imperceptible sound, a whisper. It was coming from the kitchen, just beyond the open living room. It was so faint that Sarah wasn't sure she heard it at first, but as the seconds passed, it grew louder. It wasn't the kind of whisper you'd expect to hear in an old horror movie. It was a soft, breathy murmur, like someone was standing just behind her, breathing into her ear. Sarah. Sarah. She sat up, heart pounding. Midnight was nowhere to be found. The whispering stopped suddenly, leaving only the unsettling silence. Sarah waited a moment, expecting the cat to reappear, but it didn't. Curiosity and a growing sense of dread pulled her toward the kitchen. She tiptoed across the floor, trying to be as quiet as possible, and peered around the corner. The light in the kitchen was still on, and the shadows danced across the walls in strange patterns. She stepped inside slowly, looking around. The air felt colder than before. And then she saw it on the counter, a small silver key. It wasn't there when she had arrived, but there it was, lying in the exact center of the kitchen counter. Sarah's stomach twisted into knots. She had no idea what the key was for, but she knew it wasn't hers, and it certainly didn't belong to her neighbor. She picked it up and turned it over in her hand, feeling the weight of it, but the more she held it, the more uneasy she became. The feeling in the room had shifted. She was no longer alone. That's when the whisper came again, louder this time, as if it were speaking right next to her ear. She froze, her body going rigid with fear. It was a voice, but it was distorted, like a broken radio. Come. Find me ... double quotes ... It was clear now. Someone or something wanted her to find something. But what? And why? With trembling hands, Sarah put the key down and turned to leave the kitchen. But as she reached for the door, she caught sight of something in the hallway, a shadow. It was not the kind of shadow you see when a light flickers. This was something more tangible, as if the darkness itself had taken form and was now standing, waiting for her. Her heart raced. She couldn't breathe. The shadow seemed to move, but only ever so slightly, as if it were watching her, observing her every move. Her instinct screamed at her to run, but her feet refused to budge. Then, as if sensing her fear, the shadow seemed to grow larger. It reached out toward her, its form flickering, warping like smoke. Find it, the voice whispered again, louder now, desperate. The key will lead you." Before she could react, Midnight appeared out of nowhere, brushing up against her legs. Sarah looked down, startled, and when she lifted her gaze, the shadow was gone. But the key was still on the counter, beckoning her. Her pulse was racing. She had to do something. She had to know what was going on. It wasn't just the key or the whispering, it was everything. The presence, the oppressive weight in the air, the shadow that had come so close. It was all connected. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was trapped inside this apartment, something that was now reaching out for her. At that moment, Sarah knew she had to confront whatever was hiding in that house. With every ounce of courage she could muster, she made her way to the bedroom door, the one Midnight had been so insistent about earlier. The cat, eerily calm, sat beside the door now, looking at her with those same unblinking eyes. Sarah opened the door slowly. Inside, the room was dark, but something glinted on the floor, a silver chain, leading toward the closet. She followed the chain, her steps tentative, each one echoing through the stillness of the house. As her hand reached for the closet door, a sudden coldness swept over her, as if the very air around her had frozen. She opened it, and inside, buried beneath a pile of old coats, was an old dusty trunk. It was locked. The key from the kitchen. It had to be for this. Her hands shook as she inserted the key into the lock. With a quiet click, the trunk opened, revealing an old, tattered journal. Sarah picked it up carefully, the pages yellowed with age. As she flipped through the journal, a chill ran down her spine. The entries were all written in the same scrawling handwriting, detailing strange happenings, whispers in the night, and strange shadows. It was all there, a history of terror and haunting, passed down through generations. And then she reached the final entry. "Tonight I am trapped. The house is cursed. The key. Find the key, and you will free me." The journal dropped from her hands, her heart stopping in her chest. She turned around, only to find that the shadow was back. But this time, it wasn't just a shadow, it was a figure slowly emerging from the dark corner of the room. Sarah couldn't breathe. The figure stepped forward, its face obscured in shadow, but she could feel its presence, like a cold wind sweeping through the room. "Thank you for finding me," the voice whispered, now clearer than ever, but it wasn't the voice from before. It was darker, more sinister. The shadow moved closer. But Sarah couldn't move. She was paralyzed by fear as the room began to spin around her. The whispers filled her mind, echoing in her ears as the darkness closed in. She screamed, but no sound came out, and just like that, everything went silent. The silence was suffocating. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as her vision blurred and the room seemed to grow smaller around her. Her breath came in short, ragged gasps. Every inch of her body screamed to run, but she couldn't move. The shadow was closing in, its form now unmistakable, taking on the shape of a figure, a person, but not entirely. It was as if the very essence of the house had become its form, dark, twisted, and full of malice. "You're not meant to be here," the voice whispered, this time from directly behind her. She froze, the figure moved closer, its features still obscured by the thick darkness, but Sarah could feel that its presence was suffocating, consuming her. The temperature in the room dropped even further, and Sarah could see her breath misting in front of her face, the chill sinking into her bones. "Please, just leave," Sarah managed to whisper, her voice trembling. But the words sounded weak, hollow in the oppressive silence. The figure didn't respond, only moved closer, its dark presence invading her personal space. Her mind raced. What was this thing? Was it real? She didn't know. She only knew one thing for certain: it wasn't human. Suddenly, The room felt even colder, and the whispering came back, louder, more frantic this time. Sarah clutched her arms, trying to hold herself together, trying to stay sane in the face of something she could not comprehend. But then, just as quickly as it had come, the pressure in the room eased. The whispering stopped. The coldness receded. The figure vanished. Sarah blinked, her heart still racing, and the room slowly came back into focus. The shadow was gone. The oppressive feeling was gone. But the silence was deafening. Her body was still trembling, but somehow she found the strength to move. The first thing she did was grab Midnight, who had been sitting quietly by the door throughout the ordeal, its green eyes glowing in the dim light. She quickly scooped the cat into her arms and ran out of the room, not daring to look back. Her mind raced with thoughts of what she had just experienced. Was it a hallucination? Was it the stress of Pet sitting alone for the first time in weeks? But deep down, Sarah knew it wasn't a mere figment of her imagination. It was too real, too vivid. The whispering, the shadow, the key. It was all connected, and she had stumbled upon something she was never meant to understand. She fled to the front door and locked it behind her, breathing heavily, her hands still shaking. The apartment was silent now, almost too silent, but the eerie feeling had not left her. As Sarah stood there in the dark entryway, clutching Midnight, she couldn't shake the feeling that the house wasn't empty, that something was still there, watching her, waiting. The next day, Sarah didn't even attempt to return to the apartment. She texted her neighbor, explaining the situation, though she could hardly find the words to describe what had happened. She told them she could no longer take care of the cat and left the apartment key in the mailbox. It was a strange feeling, walking away from the job she had once looked forward to. But as the house disappeared from her view, she knew it was the right decision. The last thing she wanted was to return to that place and confront whatever haunted its walls. Days later, she received a message from her neighbor. They thanked her for looking after Midnight, but also mentioned something strange. They told Sarah that the key she had found didn't belong to any door in the apartment. It wasn't even theirs. It was an old key, a family heirloom, one that had been lost for years. But there was no way Sarah could have known that. The final message Sarah received chilled her to the bone. I've been having some strange experiences in the house too, but I thought I was just imagining things. She never went back to house sit again, and to this day, when Sarah walks past that old apartment building, she can't help but glance up at the window. She doesn't know what happened there, or who or what was trying to reach out to her. But one thing was certain. She would never forget the whispering shadows that had come to life before her eyes. Story 2, The Forgotten Animal. It was supposed to be an ordinary weekend. Jasmine, a 29-year-old pet sitter, was used to watching over animals while their owners were away, and it was a side job she enjoyed. The pay was decent, the animals were always pleasant to take care of, and the homes were typically quiet and peaceful. But the weekend, she was hired to care for Buster, a playful golden retriever, would be far from ordinary. Jasmine had been hired by the Martins, a kind family who needed someone to watch over their dog while they went on a weekend getaway. The house was nestled in a quiet neighborhood, surrounded by trees, with a large backyard for Buster to play in. She arrived at the house on Friday evening and was greeted warmly by the family. Buster was excited to see her, wagging his tail and jumping up to greet her. Everything seemed normal, peaceful. That night, after giving Buster his dinner and making sure he was comfortable, Jasmine settled in for a quiet evening. She was exhausted from a long week at work and looked forward to some much-needed relaxation. She watched TV, played with Buster a bit, and even gave him a good scratch behind the ears before heading to bed. But as she was drifting off to sleep, She heard something odd, a faint scratching sound. It was coming from downstairs. At first, Jasmine thought it might just be the house settling, or perhaps Buster was playing with one of his toys. But as the sound continued, growing more persistent, she decided to investigate. She got up from her bed, grabbed her phone for light, and made her way to the stairs. As she descended into the dimly lit hallway, the scratching grew louder, now accompanied by what sounded like muffled whimpering. It was coming from the utility room, a room she had been instructed to avoid, as the Martins had stored some old furniture and boxes there. She hesitated for a moment, but then approached the door, her curiosity pushing her forward. When she opened it, her heart stopped. There, in the corner of the room, was a cage, a large old-fashioned cage. And inside it, a dog. But not Buster. It was a dog she had never seen before. The animal was thin, its fur matted and dirty, its eyes wide with fear. It cowered in the cage, shaking violently. It looked as if it had been trapped there for years, forgotten by the Martins. Jasmine's mind raced. What was this? Why was there another dog in the house, and why was it locked away in a cage? She immediately took out her phone and snapped a photo, ready to confront the Martins when they returned. But as soon as she tried to open the cage door, the dog snarled, its eyes flashing with anger and fear. Jasmine stepped back, terrified, but then the dog's behavior shifted. It calmed down, sitting down in the cage and looking at her, almost pleadingly. Jasmine had seen this kind of behavior before. This was an abused animal, a pet that had been abandoned and left in the dark for far too long. She quickly closed the door, feeling a wave of guilt wash over her. She couldn't just leave the dog locked up in that room. But what could she do? She wasn't sure what was going on, but she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't going to leave that poor animal in that cage for another second. Jasmine stood in the dark utility room, her mind racing. The dog, cowering in the cage, had eyes that spoke volumes of its torment. Jasmine could feel the weight of its pain, its desperation to escape, and she knew she couldn't leave it there. She had to do something. She couldn't let it suffer any longer. But what was she supposed to do? The Martins were away for the weekend, and she was all alone. She couldn't just let the dog out of the cage without knowing its condition, its behavior, or whether it was dangerous. Her heart hammered in her chest as she paced back and forth, trying to figure out her next move. She decided to call her best friend, Anna, who had worked with animal rescue groups in the past. If anyone could help her figure out what to do, it was Anna. The phone rang for a few moments before Anna answered, her voice groggy from sleep. "Jess? It's past midnight. What's up? I need help. There's a dog in the Martins' house, locked up in a cage." "I don't know what to do," Jasmine replied, her voice trembling. "It's not Buster. It's another dog, and it's in bad shape." Anna's tone shifted immediately from groggy to concerned. "What do you mean, it's in bad shape? Are you okay?" Jasmine quickly explained what had happened, how she discovered the dog locked away, its thin body, its terrified eyes. She told Anna about the whimpering, the scratching, and the fear that had gripped her when she saw the dog. "Okay," Anna said, her voice steady. "You need to get that dog out of there. If it's as bad as you say, it could have been abandoned or worse. Do you have any food for it?" "Yes, I gave it some of Buster's food earlier, but it didn't eat much. I'm not sure if it's okay with food or anything else. All right. Here's what I think you should do," Anna instructed. "Calm down, breathe. Get the dog out of the cage, but make sure you move slowly. Don't rush it. You don't know how it'll react. And call the Martins as soon as you can. They need to know what's going on." Jasmine nodded, even though Anna couldn't see her. She could hear the concern in her friend's voice, and it grounded her, gave her a sense of purpose. "Okay, I'll do that. Thanks, Anna." After hanging up, Jasmine took a deep breath and steeled herself. She turned the light on in the utility room and approached the cage carefully. The dog was still sitting, its eyes following her every movement, its body trembling. "Hey, it's okay," Jasmine said softly, trying to calm the animal. "I'm going to get you out of there, all right?" Slowly, she reached for the cage door. The dog didn't react, just stared at her with those wide, fearful eyes. Jasmine opened the door just enough to slip her hand inside, cautiously offering her fingers for the dog to sniff. The dog took a tentative sniff and then, with a slight whimper, licked her hand. It was a small victory, but it was enough to reassure Jasmine that the animal wasn't going to bite. She gently coaxed the dog out of the cage, its legs shaky as it stood for the first time in who knows how long. Jasmine guided the dog into the living room, where she sat it down on the couch. The poor creature was so thin, she could feel its ribs under the rough fur. She immediately took a blanket from the sofa and wrapped it around the dog, offering some comfort. She called the Martins, her voice trembling with urgency as she told them everything. It didn't take long for the phone to ring back, and when the Martins picked up, the reaction was one of shock and confusion. What do you mean there's another dog?" Mrs. Martin asked, her voice panicked. "There shouldn't be another dog there. We only have Buster. What's going on?" Jasmine explained that the dog was in terrible shape and locked away in the utility room. She told Mrs. Martin everything she had discovered and urged them to come home immediately. The Martins seemed genuinely upset, and they promised to come back as soon as they could. Jasmine didn't know what to think. The Martins had never mentioned another dog. They had only spoken of Buster, the golden retriever, the dog Jasmine was supposed to care for. The more she thought about it, the stranger everything seemed. As she sat on the couch with the dog curled up beside her, Jasmine's mind raced. Why had the Martins kept this dog a secret? Why had it been locked away, isolated from the rest of the house? And why had it been left to suffer in silence for so long? Just as Jasmine was starting to feel a little more at ease with the dog by her side, the sound of a car pulling up outside broke her thoughts. She rushed to the window and saw the Martins' car parked in the driveway. They were back. Mrs. Martin was the first to rush inside, her face pale and full of worry. "Oh my God," she gasped when she saw the dog. "How could this happen? Why didn't we know?" Mr. Martin followed closely behind, his face equally shocked. "We didn't know it was here. It was my brother's dog. He left it with us a while ago when he moved out of state. We didn't want to take it to the shelter, so we kept it in the back room. But it was always so quiet. We thought it was fine. We didn't think it needed anything. We didn't want to deal with it, so we just let it be." Jasmine's heart sank. She had a sinking feeling in her stomach as she realized what had really happened. The Martins had been hiding the dog, abandoning it in the utility room and leaving it to suffer, out of sight and out of mind. The poor animal had been forgotten, locked away like it was nothing more than a nuisance. "I can't believe this," Jasmine said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You can't just lock a living creature away like that and expect it to be fine." Mrs. Martin's eyes filled with tears as she knelt beside the dog. "We were wrong. We didn't know how to handle it, but that's no excuse. We should have done better by him." Jasmine watched as the Martins apologized to the dog, promising to take better care of it from now on. It was too late to undo the harm that had been done, but Jasmine stayed for a while longer, making sure the dog whom they named Max was comfortable before she left. She had never imagined that a simple weekend of pet sitting could turn into something so sinister, but in the end, Max had found his voice, and Jasmine had done what she could to make things right. But she knew one thing for sure. She would never look at Pet sitting the same way again. Story 3. The Haunted Doghouse. It was supposed to be a simple favor. Mia had agreed to take care of her friend Zoe's dogs for a week while she was out of town on vacation. Zoe's house was in a quiet suburban neighborhood, tucked away in the corner of a peaceful cul-de-sac. Mia had visited the house several times before, and it always felt safe, warm, and inviting. The dogs, two lovable golden retrievers named Charlie and Daisy, were well behaved, and Mia had watched over them during short trips before without incident, but something was different this time. The first few days went by uneventfully. Mia spent her days working from Zoe's home, taking breaks to walk the dogs and play in the yard. Charlie and Daisy were their usual affectionate selves, always eager for attention. But when night fell, the house began to feel off. It wasn't an immediate shift, it was subtle, something that crept up on Mia like a slow burn. One evening, after taking the dogs on their evening walk, Mia let them back into the house and went to the kitchen to make dinner. The house was unusually quiet, even though she could hear the dogs moving about in the living room. As she chopped vegetables, she felt a strange sense of unease wash over her. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up, and she couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was watching her. She tried to ignore it, brushing it off as the result of too many late nights working. But the sensation didn't go away. It lingered like a shadow, following her every move. It wasn't until she heard the faint sound of something scraping against the walls that she started to feel the chill creeping in. It was coming from outside, from the doghouse in the backyard. Mia paused, her knife hovering above the cutting board. That's odd, she thought. Zoe had told her the dogs had never slept in the doghouse. It was just there for decoration, a leftover piece from when they had a bigger yard years ago. Zoe had mentioned it several times, saying the dogs preferred to sleep indoors, and Mia hadn't thought much of it until now, curious. She grabbed her flashlight and walked outside to check on the noise. The night air was cool and crisp, the moon casting an eerie glow over the backyard. The doghouse sat in the far corner of the yard, its dark silhouette looming in the shadows. As Mia approached it, she noticed the dogs weren't anywhere nearby. They had been with her just moments ago, but now they were nowhere to be found. Charlie? Daisy? Mia called out, her voice trembling ... and no response. The scraping sound came again, this time louder, as if something or someone was scratching against the wooden walls of the doghouse. Mia felt her pulse quicken. She had no idea what to expect, but her instincts told her to be cautious. As she reached the doghouse, she shone the flashlight inside, but the beam of light revealed nothing but shadows and a few old blankets. Then something caught her eye. The ground around the doghouse was disturbed, as though something had been digging at the earth. Mia crouched down, shining the light closer. There, partially hidden in the dirt, was a small metal key, its rusted surface glinting in the flashlight's glow. Mia's breath caught in her throat. A key? Why would there be a key buried here? She thought, her mind racing. Zoe hadn't mentioned anything about a key, and it certainly didn't seem like something that belonged to the dogs. Mia carefully picked up the key, her fingers brushing against the cold metal. As she stood up, ready to head back inside, she heard the dogs barking faintly in the distance. She turned, startled, but the dogs were still nowhere to be seen. The barking grew louder, but it wasn't coming from the yard. It was coming from inside the house. Her heart skipped a beat. The barking sounded frantic, as if the dogs were in distress. Mia bolted for the back door, the key still clutched tightly in her hand. As she entered the house, she was met with an overwhelming sense of coldness. The living room was empty, but the air felt thick, heavy with a strange tension. The dogs weren't in the living room, nor in the kitchen, where Mia had last seen them. Charlie? Daisy? Mia called out, her voice shaking now. Suddenly, the sound of scratching returned, louder than ever. It came from upstairs scratching, followed by the faintest whisper of what sounded like pawing at a door. Mia's stomach dropped. The dogs were upstairs. But why hadn't they come when she called them? Something wasn't right. With the flashlight in hand, Mia hurried up the stairs. As she reached the top, she was struck by a sense of unease, a feeling that the house had shifted, like it was no longer the place she had once visited so many times. The hallway felt longer, darker, the walls closing in around her as she moved toward Zoe's bedroom. The door was closed, but there was an unmistakable sound on the other side. Scratching. It was coming from the bedroom door. Mia approached it slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. She reached for the doorknob, but it wouldn't turn. The door was locked. Charlie? Daisy? Mia whispered, her voice barely audible. The scratching grew louder, more frantic, as if something was desperately trying to escape. Without thinking, Mia slammed her shoulder into the door, forcing it open. The door creaked and groaned, but it didn't give way. Just as she was about to try again, the door swung open on its own, revealing the room. But what Mia saw made her blood run cold. The dogs were inside, standing in the middle of the room. Their eyes were wide, staring at something in the far corner. Something Mia couldn't see. They were silent, their bodies rigid, as if paralyzed by fear, and then Mia saw the doghouse key, now lying on the floor of the room. It had fallen from her hand, but somehow it had ended up here, inside the room. As she stepped into the room, the temperature seemed to drop even further, the air thick with an unseen presence. Mia turned toward the corner where the dogs were looking, her breath shallow. There, standing in the shadows, was a figure, a silhouette. It was tall, unnaturally tall, with hollow, empty eyes that seemed to stare right through her. The figure didn't move. It didn't speak. Mia's heart raced as she backed away, the dogs following her every step. She stumbled backward into the hallway, the key still in her hand, the coldness pressing against her chest like an invisible weight. She couldn't explain what she had seen, what was happening. But one thing was clear. The house was no longer safe. And neither were the dogs. Panicked, Mia ran down the stairs, calling the dogs to follow her. She didn't stop until she was outside in the yard, the night air filling her lungs. The house loomed behind her, silent once more. But she couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching her, waiting for her to return. Mia left that night. As for the key, Mia kept it, though she never knew what it truly unlocked. Some things, she realized, were better left buried.